So we have news, Ross.
We do.
Breaking news. This is midweek news. We wanted to cover this outside of the podcast because we really want to talk about this before it gets overblown and before our arguments that we have that we've crafted are overshown by the same arguments just said by different people. We will be talking about this at length on the podcast this weekend. Today is the 24th of September, so keep that in mind if you're watching this at a later date. Anyway, here we go.
So Bob Iger is actually just released a new book called The Ride of a Lifetime.
And that
And it
it
basically
is.
covers his 15 years as the CEO of Disney. And in it, he has some very brutally honest, truthful statements about what really happened following Disney's acquisition of Lucasfilm and what really happened with George Lucas leading up to the production of The Force Awakens. And as somebody who grew up with the prequel trilogy and loves everything that George Lucas has done, pioneering entertainment twice in his life with both trilogies of the Star Wars saga, this was disheartening to read. And not something I thought we would have the opportunity to read this early on, considering Star Wars is still a thriving, active franchise for Disney, but it's right
No,
here in this memoir.
this is something that an 80, 85, 90-year-old Bob Iger says after he's already retired. And he
Or
just said
just
it during his career, which
or
is
even just after he retires from Disney.
just after he retires. No, but this sounds like a cynical, maniacal old man saying these things. Why would you say that when you have a job position at one of the biggest media no, not one of the biggest media company in the world, where you have fans, you have employees, all of these people that look up to you, saying these things to fans of Star Wars is astonishing, especially noting that he still has his job, that he's still in that position, and that he's still the figurehead, not the figurehead, but the biggest producer, I guess you could say, of Star Wars movies. This is social suicide.
Yeah, I mean, so guys, basically, Bob Iger came out and said that, and it just really validated and confirmed a lot of our concerns for what probably had gone down, and that it was pretty much just as bad, if not worse, than what we had imagined. And like we were just saying, Tan, I mean, it's really not being covered that thoroughly in the media. I mean, but this is potentially brand damaging, right? This is not a good thing to have come out when the grand finale of the Star Wars saga developed by Disney and J.J. Abrams once again is about to hit theaters. I mean, maybe I would have expected to hear these statements after, not before. It's shocking. And so essentially, we have the articles pulled up here, and while the sites comic book and comic book movie aren't necessarily reputable, the quotes are in there.
I do
And
want to say really quick before we get into quotes.
yeah,
I do want to say that the unfortunate reality of the situation is that this only affects major fans of Star Wars, people that are genuine fans of Star Wars, people that have grown up with it, that respect Star Wars and know the real world inner workings of Star Wars. This isn't going to affect the average Disney viewer. This isn't going to affect
right.
the people that go to any movie with a Disney branding on it. Where for me personally, as a Star Wars fanatic, as somebody who
Mm-hmm.
loves this, as somebody who's grown up with this, despite memory loss, I still had Star Wars for my entire existence. I would say,
Yeah.
and this. I mean, this really changes my perspective. This really makes me think about how much better Star Wars could have been. This is only because I'm a Star Wars fan. This is only because Ross is a Star Wars fan. So unfortunately, where Ross, this could be brand damaging. Only a small percentage of the fan base will outcry because of this. Because
Right.
unfortunately, I would wager that 80% of the Star Wars viewers, the people that go in and buy tickets, aren't like us. They aren't the
Oh,
fanatics.
of course, 100%.
Right. So is this going to hurt Disney? Probably not, which is
No,
unfortunate in
but
my opinion.
it was just shocking to see this come out in his book before the release of Rise of Skywalker and not
Absolutely.
after. So, um, we can just start going through the quotes
For sure.
because in his memoir, Bob Iger says, at some point in the process, George told me that he had completed outlines for 3 new movies. He agreed to send us 3 copies of the outlines, one for me, one for Senior Executive Vice President Alan Braverman, and one for co chairman and Chief Creative Officer Alan Horn, who'd just been hired to run our studio. Alan Horn and I read George's outlines and we decided we needed to buy them. Though we made clear in the purchase agreement that we would not be contractually obligated to adhere to the plot lines he'd laid out. Iger continues. He knew that I was going to stand firm on the question of creative control, but it wasn't an easy thing for him to accept, and so he reluctantly agreed to be available to consult with us at our request. I promised that we would be open to his ideas. This was not a hard promise to make. Of course, we would be open to George Lucas's ideas, but the outlines, we would be under no obligation.
Which
And
is
that's fine.
this is corporate double speak for we did this to pacify him, but were we really gonna follow it to the T?
Probably not.
Exactly. So this is
And
pretty much this is like I said, corporate doublespeak for George Lucas, great guy, we respect him. We're gonna buy this off of him. We're gonna make him feel involved, but we don't have to. And if moving forward we don't have to adhere to this, let's make him feel involved right now, in the moment. Let's pacify him, like I said. Which is unfortunate. I mean that does not make him sound good if you really look at his actual core argument there, his actual core statement there.
yeah, so God forbid George had good faith in them and reluctantly agreed to be available to consult and forfeited creative control because he trusted them and trusted that they would at least derive some inspiration from his outlines, use parts of his outline, something significant, so that he could rest easy knowing the future of the saga would be in good hands, would continue as intended. And that's what he believed, rightfully so. I mean, can you blame him? I mean, he spent nearly 40 years doing this,
Right.
changing the world with this franchise, inspiring millions of people across generations. And so Iger then details meeting with Lucas, screenwriter Michael Arndt, and Lucasfilm president Kathleen Kennedy at Skywalker Ranch to talk about their ideas for the film. Now, this confuses me, Tate, because I believe there were meetings, I could be wrong, so do not quote me here at all, but I vividly remember just George and JJ meeting, a black and white photo being released, and comments from Kathleen Kennedy saying that George had downloaded his ideas into JJ, basically insinuating that everything was good and in safe hands now with JJ, and that he had
Right.
essentially become an extension of George. That was the implication. But this when we get to this point, Iger details meeting with Lucas, Michael Arndt, Kathy. You know, this sounds like a separate meeting that happened after, if I'm not mistaken. So George immediately got upset as they began to describe the plot, and it dawned on him that we weren't using one of the stories he submitted during the negotiations. Tay, could you imagine over 30 years changing the world with Star Wars,
Then having your
handing it
ideas
over?
binned.
I mean, the disrespect, it's insane.
Oh yeah.
And so the truth was, Iger continues, the Force Awakens writer director J.J. Abrams, Alan Horn, and I discussed the direction in which the saga should go, and we all agreed that it wasn't what George had outlined. George knew we weren't contractually bound to anything, but he thought that our buying the story treatments was a promise that we would follow them. And he was disappointed that his story was being discarded. Iger continues, I've been so careful since our first conversation not to mislead him in any way, and I didn't think I had now, but I could have handled it better. I should have prepared him for the meeting with JJ and Michael and told him about our conversations, that we felt it was better to go in another direction. I could have talked through this with him and possibly avoided angering him by not surprising him. So George
This
basically
whole
walked into he walked into an indirect ambush, right?
and this whole thing that he's saying, guys watching, people watching, this
Yeah.
whole almost regretful, it was unfortunate that this happened. No, no, that is so he looks good on paper. You have to. This guy has been the CEO of Disney for 15 years. He knows corporate doublespeak better than almost anyone on the planet. He knows how to mask his words and make himself look good. He's saying it was unfortunate. It was regretful. It was, I could have included him.
I mean, this
But
just sounds so manipulative.
it's pure manipulation. It sounds like George Lucas was on board to be a creative, almost director, a creative,
Yeah.
you know, almost pool to pull from. He's a creation pool, and you pull the ideas from the creation pool in order to create something new, and they completely went behind his back.
I mean,
I
it
mean,
just this. Listen, man, Star Wars, you could argue, is in a different place now than it was when this was all happening. But this really rubs me the wrong way.
and you know what,
Because
Ross? You can
that
argue
means
that. You can
this
argue that,
confirms
but
that this confirms the dishonesty that they started out showing us the pictures of George and JJ meeting. Everything's okay. George had downloaded his ideas into JJ. It was all, and then it all became a lie.
and also,
And so
Ross, you could say
we can't trust them.
that it's in a different place now, but this was all prepared. They were preparing for the future. That's the whole thing with Disney. Look at the MCU. They
Right.
prepare for the future. They knew this would happen. Then maybe they didn't know that the memoir would come out, but they knew Star Wars would be in the place it is today. They were just hoping that Last Jedi would be a
With
hit,
less controversy,
right?
I'm
With
sure.
less controversy, right? So they knew that that Star Wars would be in the place it was today. So you can't really use that as an argument here in defense
Right.
of them. Nobody should. Disney are the gods of long term. Keep that
I'm
in
saying
mind.
to offer credit where it's due. Right?
What? No, no,
The
no. I understand,
Mandalorian,
and I'm not
the
saying
Clone Wars coming back. There have been mistakes, but we also had Rogue One. It's just the fact that this started off so dishonest
right.
really ruins a lot of it.
Absolutely.
Is what I'm saying.
The unfortunate
And
thing, dude, is we're finally at a spot where Star Wars looks like it has brighter pastures with Mandalorian, with Clone Wars. So it's so unfortunate that this comes out now.
yeah, I mean, what the hell? Why is this not next year?
Right? Why isn't this
Um,
after all the good?
So Iger then admits, now in the first meeting with him about the future of Star Wars, George felt betrayed. And while this whole process would never have been easy for him, we'd gotten off to an unnecessarily rocky start. I, I just feel really bad for George. Yes, he walked away with $4 billion. But what matters more to him than the money, of course, would be what was to happen, what was to become of the franchise that would define his life and a whole generation of people around the world. And so basically Disney, this is a quote from the site now, not Bob Iger. Disney's sequel trilogy ultimately incorporated ideas that resembled Lucas's. Lucas once envisioned a female Jedi Padawan, Kira, eventually materialized as Daisy Ridley's Rey, and an aged and exiled Luke Skywalker played by a returning Mark Hamill. The story and in training Rey rather and reluctant teacher Luke in Ryan Johnson's Star Wars: The Last Jedi was inspired in part by Lucas's original concepts, with the Jedi killer character imagined by Lucas earlier being realized as the Force Awakens villain Kylo Ren. So basically saying that elements and very baseline concepts, the more simpler concepts from Lucas's outlines did show up to some capacity. Lucas commented on his plans for the sequels in 2018 as Lucas told it the trilogy was going to get into a microbiotic world, exploring a world of creatures that operate differently than we do. I call them the Wills. This is now a quote from George. And the Wills are the ones who actually control the universe. They feed off the Force, Lucas said. If I'd held on to the company, I could have done it. And then it would have been done. Of course, a lot of the fans would have hated it, just like they did Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, and everything, but at least the whole story from beginning to end would be told. So, basically, we heard about this, as the article says here, last year, when George basically laid out his ideas for the Wills. Right, the Wills would be these omniscient, these massive, like these crazy, trippy, almost divine-like beings that are overseeing the universe, and perhaps almost in a narrator's capacity, looking back in a galaxy far, far away, a long time ago, at the events of what had occurred. And I don't see the problem with that. Obviously, that's a lot. That is a lot to wrap your heads around. That is a lot to take in. And unfortunately, Disney, I think, would have preferred, of course, and not just I think made very clearly, they wanted to conform and revert back to the simplicity, to the realism, the practicality that made the original trilogy special back in the 70s and 80s, because they needed to develop and create a consultation package for the world to bring the rest of the world back on board with Star Wars and all of those who were rubbed the wrong way by the prequels. Because us as kids growing up with the prequels did not have our voices heard until now when we are grown up. So, Tate, then one more quote comes in here, and Iger says, just prior to the global release, Kathy screened The Force Awakens for George. He didn't hide his disappointment. There's nothing new, he said. In each of the films in the original trilogy, it was important to him to present new worlds, new stories, new characters, and new technologies. In this one, he said, there weren't enough visual or technical leaps forward. He wasn't wrong, but he also wasn't appreciating the pressure we were under to give ardent fans a film that felt quintessentially Star Wars. We'd intentionally created a world that was visually and tonally connected to the earlier films to not stray too far from what people loved and expected. And George was criticizing us for the very thing we were trying to do. Looking back with the perspective of several years and a few more Star Wars films, I believe JJ achieved the near impossible, creating a perfect bridge between what had been and what was to come. And Tate, I don't know about you, man, but I am glad almost that George hasn't spoken about this a lot, because this hurts.
Yeah, no, this sucks really bad. This is
The fact that it started off this way and that none of the sequel trilogy is what George intended. Tate, to me, George Lucas is Star Wars. And regardless of what I think about his ideas, what he says goes. The end. Full stop.
and I think Star Wars fans understand that with prequel era. You know what I mean? Prequel era started off really rough, but when you look at movie 1 to movie 3, you have a concise story that makes sense through the 3 movies that further connects to the original 3 movies. People wouldn't have liked the Wills. I love them. I think they were handled great, and I think I would love to see them further. Even if the first movie in that trilogy sucks and is extremely divisive, at least we know that it will have a consistent story through. I don't think George Lucas is the greatest script writer in Hollywood.
Sure.
You rewatch episodes 4 and 6, it gets a little rough. Episode 5 even gets a little rough, but I think that one's written the best. But
yeah.
he is the creative pool, as I said, into Star Wars. It is almost a psychedelic drug trip of a universe. To think of how unique and how creative each piece of Star Wars is, I mean, it blows my absolute mind that he was able to create an entire star system in his brain. I mean, I cannot contextualize more than than a fictional continent, and he created an entire universe, a star system. So I mean, it is incredible what that man has achieved in terms of his creative, in terms of his creative expression, and that should have been respected going forward.
I mean,
And also
you
really
see,
quick before we end here, because we're getting close to time on this, I want to bring up the whole effects argument of them wanting to create a Star Wars that feels at home, quote unquote. You don't need to use technology from 1970 to make it feel like a Star Wars movie. What makes Star Wars is extreme breakthrough. Look at the CGI in the first, and not in the first three, my bad, in the prequel trilogy. That is groundbreaking for the time. Look at
but you,
2006 CGI, and then look at Revenge of the Sith.
but you see, that was the divisive thing, right? And I just we've talked about this at length on other podcasts. I have never understood this irrational worshipping of realism and practicality and everything feeling so completely real in a galaxy far, far away, in a fictitious fantasy universe about space wizards, a mystical force, and an intergalactic empire going up against rebels that can traverse a galaxy like it's not. This is ridiculous. Could you imagine if the Marvel Cinematic Universe had to cling to such an idiotic idea and pretend like it was the 70s and 80s? Could
Thanos
you
would be a painted
imagine
Josh Brolin. That's what it would be,
Thanos would
Ross.
be a painted Josh Brolin? We wouldn't have even had Titan. We wouldn't have all the incredible technology. We wouldn't have anything that makes the visual spectacle of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And so, while I get the idea of creating a consultation package in the form of The Force Awakens by echoing the past directly, because George went in, he saw this screening and he saw, what did he see? Another Death Star. Oh, but it's bigger now and it's a planet and it can wipe out multiple planets. And we're back in the forest, we're back in the snow, we're back in the desert. We've got another character who shows up who comes from the desert, the exact same age as Luke Skywalker, a force user unbeknownst to them, about to change the galaxy. It was way too close to A New Hope. That is what The Force Awakens was. It was a consultation package for the world. Here is what Star Wars can be. Please come back.
And here's what it
And
was. I don't have a huge problem with Force Awakens because it is New Hope, right? But it's a little more, not much more. It's very safe. It is very safe, and that's not what George Lucas wanted. Is Phantom Menace safe in terms of Star Wars? No, not at all. Right off the bat, you're introduced to a swamp planet, a wasteland planet, with a CGI main character and two protagonists that are both high-ranking Jedi, or high power level Jedi, I should say.
mm-hmm.
It didn't play it safe. When you look at
No, and
when you
that's
look
the
at
thing about Star Wars, is not playing it safe. That's what makes it special. It's what made
exactly,
those sagas so distinct.
I love to look at the final scenes of the Star Wars movies. Right, let's just get rid of the original trilogy for now. Look at Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. Both, and Force Awakens does this way better because it's in a lava ice planet. You have that cliffside, you have the lava breaking in, you have the core of the planet exposed. And then in The Last Jedi, you have a white planet. So you have two white planets. Look at Revenge of the Sith. You have a lava planet where two legends are fighting to the death.
Not even just Revenge of the Sith, man. I mean the entirety of the prequel trilogy. I mean, you're
Right.
talking Kamino, you're
Geonosis.
talking Geonosis, you're talking,
But just the
Megiddo, Cato
ending scenes.
Nemoidia, Felucia. These incredible, just wondrous, extravagant worlds that expanded the universe, expanded the story as we were introduced to all kinds of new species and new aliens that couldn't be pulled off practically. I mean, George Lucas was taking us into the new digital age and the new era that ILM was paving forward, and people were not ready for it. And so now here we are, us prequel fans, all grown up, supporting the prequels, being vocal because we were too young at the time, and now it's just a shame because I think, and we've talked about this, Rogue One struck the perfect balance of practicality and
Oh
the
my
visual effects
god.
and the
Speaking of
capabilities of
final
CGI.
areas. Speaking of
Yeah.
final areas, dude. Oh my gosh. a beach planet where sandbars extend from eye view. You have gorgeous blue oceans, these large imperial structures that aren't even close to what we see in real life. You can make that argument with Maz's castle, but yet again, that's just a forest. We don't see beaches that span from eye shot. You know, even in the tropics, right? There's forestation on these planets. No. It was incredible final location.
And you and I both liked The Force Awakens.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, despite the movie's origin, despite it not being from George,
I still like
the direct similarities to The Force Awakens. I'm sorry, The New Hope. I'm getting confused. It is still a really solid film, even if despite all of this.
Yes.
But to know now this is really what happened, that George Lucas was angry, that he was upset, disappointed, and betrayed. It hurts. I mean, this sucks to finally know.
Definitely stings.
This just sucks. I mean, Tate, we are not these radical fans out there that have just been incessant and relentless attacking Lucasfilm and Disney and Lucasfilm leadership and those working on Star Wars since 2017. I mean, we're not children here talking about this, but it does suck. I mean, we're not going to engage in Twitter wars about this or attack people who might have dissenting opinions and who may not support George as much, or who may not support the prequels as much, or who may not support, the idea of pioneering technology and ideas with every new trilogy in the Star Wars saga. But this sucks.
Yeah, and it makes it harder to enjoy.
It makes it really hard to go into Rise of Skywalker. Let me tell you, it was already hard enough, considering our faith in the story of the sequel trilogy shattered with The Last Jedi.
Oh, yeah.
But this just really, for me, is the final nail in the coffin that was any remaining excitement I had for the Rise of Skywalker. And Tate getting asked by so many people, are you making Rise of Skywalker figures? Are you excited for Rise of Skywalker? The answer is no. The answer is no.
Yeah. Well,
it's not from George.
In closing, I mean, I think that the most important argument to make here, we got a great movie with The Force Awakens, but then we really fell off after that. George Lucas would have done it. We would have
after
had
Rogue One.
Right. That I mean, specifically the trilogy. Mm-hmm. We would have gotten a completed story if George Lucas was the figurehead. We would have gotten a completed story. Even if the first movie's not that good, even if the second movie's not that good, we'd still have a full Star Wars story. And that's what fans deserve. We deserve a full Star Wars experience, because that is the norm, right? You look at the prequels, you look at the original trilogy, it's a full story.
You know, Tate, I'll be honest with you. I wish George had sold in 2012. I think if he had just given it another 6 years to a decade, finished out the Clone Wars and done this trilogy, and then sold it, we could have been in a much better place. We would be much older. We could have been in a much better place.
Well, guys, that's going to do it for this kind of, midweek episode, if you will. Not really an episode of the podcast. But if you do enjoy the content like this, let us know, because we do want to start doing this. There are so many situations where Ross and I see relevant news, and it just kind of pains us to wait until Sunday.
Right.
So I think this could be something really great moving forward.
So definitely let us know what you think down in the comments, because this is just fun for us to do. We didn't want to have to sit on something so important like this until Sunday. And so we appreciate you guys coming out, hanging out with us. And if you did enjoy, I guess to please the algorithm or whatever, you can drop a like or whatever. Who cares?
This channel is for us and for you. It's not about an algorithm. It's not about any of that bull crap. Let's strike against YouTube. Let's just have fun here. But hey, guys, thanks so much for watching.
All right.
See y'all later.
Take care.